part of the administration's great success in the early days was abolishing the DEI bureaucracy within the federal government. It was a day one executive order. And within 30 days, most of the DEI apparatus throughout the federal government had been destroyed. And actually, to my surprise, even, there was very little pushback. There was very little resistance. There was very little backlash. However, institutions on the outside, corporations, universities, school districts, have kept this DEI system, a system of anti-white discrimination in particular, as part of their operating procedure. And so I think for us, point 4 is you have to use the power of the government to say, this stops now. It's a violation of the Civil Rights Act. You don't qualify for federal grants and contracts. You have to stop it.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, I think another sort of broad category of change that we're asking for here combines the previous category with this one. So as with Antifa, what we're asking for here is a total reform of these institutions. We need to radically reform higher ed and, all of these, like the medical industry, et cetera, and remove all of this ideology that crept in over the last 10 years. I am a extremist on this point. Okay. I really think we need to treat this ideology like a cancer. And we need to go in and systematically identify how we do this, I guess, is up for some debate, and we can argue on the margins, like who is an influential leader versus who is just someone following orders. There is an important distinction there, but we need to identify anybody in a position of leadership, the decision makers. And we need to go back and we need to look at who was making decisions in accordance with this anti-white ideology, but that broadly is encompassed under this sort of like woke banner. So this would include like the trans stuff and, anybody in the medical industry who's trying to like trans kids, et cetera. And we need to remove them completely. We need to apply maximum coercive pressure on these institutions to get rid of these people. They cannot employ these people any longer. That I know this sounds harsh, but no, we have to just fire them. They're going to have to go find something else to do. They were derelict in their responsibility to steward these institutions in a manner that was consistent with the public good. Okay, these are public-private institutions that exist to be stewarded in the interests of the citizens of the United States of America at large. They were derelict in that responsibility, and now they need to face career consequences because of it. I really am agnostic on what this looks like. Any way that we can find to apply pressure to these institutions, withholding funding is a major lever that we need to pull and get comfortable pulling. And there's going to be a lot of wailing and gnashing of teeth. And we saw this a little bit at UCLA, if you remember. There was withholding of federal funding. Oh, we can't pay our grad students. Tough. You screwed up, and now you got to pay the consequences. But we need to target this specifically on this anti-white ideology. Absolutely foot on the accelerator until we get what we want out of this. We have a small window to do it. And if we don't do it now, I am warning anybody with ears to listen, this is going to come back 10 times more potent than what we saw previously, with the added problem that they're going to have learned the lesson of how to rearrange their rhetoric so it doesn't trigger the same kind of public response. They are terrible, malignant people, but they are not dumb, and they're going to learn a lesson. And if we let them get away with it, things are going to be really bad 5 to 10 years from now.
I think that's right, but I don't think we should be agnostic on the solutions, because that's really the question that demands our attention. And that's kind of the harder question right now, because I think we won the debate on these issues in the last 5 years. If you look at BLM, the rhetoric of systemic racism, the policy of DEI, the ideology of critical race theory, those are all essentially the same general concept that penetrated the institutions, that became a subject of public debate. And if you measure the public polling now, the right has essentially won these issues. relative to public opinion, 3-1, 5-1, 10-1, depending on how you measure it, depending on how you ask the particular question. The problem, again, is administrative, however. You have to figure out how to take public opinion and shape it into the result that you desire to change the social and material realities within the institutions. The bright spot that I've seen, and I've had the fortune of, working on some of my reporting and making sure that they're aware of it, sparking some action, is Harmeet Dhillon's Office of Civil Rights at the Department of Justice. Harmeet is the real deal. She's an absolute rock star. She has done incredible good. And I think she's a really good example of someone that is not only media savvy and sophisticated, but she's actually a very capable, very tough, and very ruthless, if it needs to be, manager. And so she took an organization, the DOJ Civil Rights Department was probably one of the most left-wing departments within the federal government. And she organized the incentives so that she had, dozens of attorneys quitting. And then she's now restaffing with people who are like-minded, and she's targeting these institutions with civil rights investigations. And I think over time she'll be exacting a price, and I think that's very successful.
Okay, so can you help me better understand what this looks like? So there's some class action lawsuit, or she goes after the admissions offices at the UCs, for example, which is where I taught. This is a perfect example. Affirmative action, for example, was outlawed at the UCs years ago. But if you just look at the statistics about who was let in based on test scores and everything else, there's this obvious bias away from like white people in particular, also Asian kids to some extent. So, okay. So what happens though? I'm with you. Please walk me through this.
I'll give you ideally what will happen in the future. Will play out the story as I think it could unfold and likely will unfold. First, there's some evidence that comes into the office that an institution is engaging in illegal racial discrimination. So basically, any university qualifies.
Yes.
There are active investigations open into a number of universities, including very prominent universities, where they get enough evidence to open investigation. They have the power then to conduct an investigation, gather information, and then put a case up, right? And then the left did this successfully with, for example, police departments. Your police department is arresting too many people that look like this, therefore you're under investigation. And then there's the potential penalty, there's other remedies. And then what happens over time is that many of these departments would enter into to make the pain stop, enter into a federal consent decree, which gives the federal government and a third-party monitor the ability to have oversight over the institution, making sure it complies with the law. They have almost like plenary access to any documentation, policies, management decisions. And then it has to basically be overseen by a federal judge who will approve their ongoing adherence to the law. So that's like one model that is, I think, perfect in this case. So you could have Harvard's admissions department under, pending their agreement, under a federal consent decree to say, hey, we're going to keep you honest and making sure that you aren't doing illegal DEI programs, illegal racial discrimination, et cetera. So that is like one example of a concrete federal action that could shift the incentives over time.
Okay.
But it certainly can't be the only one. The downside to these is that they're long-term commitments. They're slow moving through the courts, and they can be reversed by the next administration. And so I think you need to have dramatic action from as many angles as possible, experiment with as many tactics. And look, are they doing some of that? Yes. Are they doing enough? No. And so I think we'd like to see more.
Okay.
So let's talk about.
I want to add one more point to this. Sorry. I know we're going long here, but this is an important point. One is, okay, yes, all these people need to be working at Panda Express. The other thing too is that, we need a cultural dimension to this. This has been a hobby horse of mine, but I'm observing, like, I was listening to a New York Times podcast, and they're trying to walk back like how crazy they were, and they were talking about it was Ross Douthat and Carlos Lozado, I think is his name, one other person on this podcast, and they were talking about Robin DiAngelo's crazy anti-white book, and they were like kind of making fun of it, like, oh, I can't believe people actually thought this was like, and I'm like, give me a break, man.
You believed it. Yeah,
of course.
You guys were all over it. Yeah.
Okay, so but I actually think this is like important. We need to establish some cultural memory around how insane these people were and make them humiliated and make them feel shame about the things that they were doing. So, okay, this is my proposal. Anybody at, the NEH, et cetera, who wants to get involved with this, we need a current year museum, the current year, and it's just a museum of woke, all the crazy excesses, all of those clips, all the trans stuff, all of the crazy articles that were coming from these mainstream presses, all of the insane stuff around BLM. We need to have like a wing in the Smithsonian to catalog and remember this kind of leftist excess and insanity, so they can't sort of walk away from it and pretend as if it never happened, which is exactly what they're going to try to do. Okay, that's my last word on that.